Hello and welcome to today's IAgrE lunchtime lecture from Jim Wilson. Jim is the Managing Director of SoilEssentials, and he'll give us a technical talk now on the development of the Tuberzone CropCast, which is a simplified growth model which predicts potato crop yield, size distribution and crop value weekly throughout the season, and more importantly means you don't have to go and dig holes, which for anyone who has grown potatoes will know that that is a hardy perennial of the task at hand. So I'll hand you over to Jim. Over to you, Jim.
Great, thank you, Andy. I'll just share the screen here, and hopefully you can all see that. So thanks very much, Andy, and thanks for the invite to speak to you all today. One thing I have to disabuse you, Andy, right now is that unfortunately we haven't yet got to the point where you don't have to dig any holes. We still have to do a few crop digs, but hopefully not as many and better targeted than you used to in the past.
I don't think your screen's sharing yet, Jim.
Okay, right.
Just have a quick look and see.
Did you? Let's try it again. I'm sure I picked the correct ones. One share. That should be it. I'm getting the border now. Can you see that?
Yeah, you're there now.
We're there now. Excellent. Yes. Okay. Well, thanks very much. And I have to acknowledge the work done by Marcus Travers, who's the lead computer modeler for SoilEssentials in this presentation. So hopefully, okay. I thought I'd better give you a little bit of background to SoilEssentials for those of you who don't know us. We're an independent precision ag company based in Scotland, but working all over the place, to be honest. We're actually a farm diversification established in 2000, so long before diversifications became sexy and important, we decided that there was legs in this, and it was started by 3 active farmers and an agronomist. Now there's a staff of 30 in total, mostly working out of the farm here, but some others are working remotely, and we have a team comprising of agronomists, engineers. We've got a team of 5 software developers and data and GIS specialists. And effectively, we saw all those years ago that there was a need for precision agriculture to try and better target what we were doing. With the rise in all the location sensitive data, GPS, etc., we thought there was a market there, and we were probably too early starting, looking back, but you have to start somewhere. We've got 3 divisions, and you'll perhaps hear me speaking about them during this talk. We have a precision agronomy division, which is actually where we started 20 years ago, really taking GPS reference soil samples, EMI scanning, measuring areas, do a lot of drone flying nowadays, and then give reports back to customers on that. The machine control side, we're the Trimble dealers for the north of the UK. We have our own RTK-wide N-trip correction network, which started in 2009. It was one of the first in the UK, and that has been going from strength to strength since then. But I suppose one of the reasons that we're here today is that the third department is software development and projects. And about 2010, we started developing software online, so basically web-based software to provide an easy, quick way of delivering products back to customers worldwide, usually focused on precision agriculture. And when we started building that, the concept was that we would focus on a white box system, so that our main target customers are actually companies and clients who agronomy companies, things like that, who need a precision ag solution, but so we tend to sell them that and relabel it, different URL, different logos, different colors to suit their own needs. One of the key facts that we found was that these customers need different tool sets. And the tool sets change as you go across the world. And one of those tool sets that I am personally very interested in and came from my own experience as a farmer is Tuberzone. And I mean, I've grown seed potatoes for 20 odd years, all my life really, which is a lot more than 20 years, unfortunately. And the potato yield and size model came out of my experience as a potato grower and the need for that. So this is one of the first things that we developed to run in the software that we build. Oh, going too far. So what is Tuberzone? Well, the problem with potatoes is that we have potatoes are a difficult crop to grow. They are almost unlike other crops in that the problem with potatoes is that if you're growing for a specific target market like seed or salad or packers even, you have a specific set of quality parameters to meet. In seed and salad, those parameters one of the main parameters tend to be size. In that, the main size fraction for seed would be between 35 and 55 millimeters. Those would be worth 250 pounds a ton, 300 pounds a ton normally. The trouble is 56 millimeter potatoes and above could be only worth in a normal year, could be worth 100 pounds a ton, could be worth 10 pounds a ton to feed to cattle. So what we tend to see is a large change in the value, spatially across the field and also over time during the life of a crop. So Tuberzone is a spatial crop model that we hope actually accurately forecasts potato yield and size distribution, importantly 2 weeks ahead, so that we can predict that size change and yield change in all the different bands, and also therefore the value change, and we can then take action to harvest or desiccate or harvest the crop at peak value throughout the field. We can obviously run it, because it's all running in the cloud, we can run it, produce reports against a single crop or across multiple production areas. I'll show you a bit of that in the future in a couple of slides' time. We are marketing this mainly to seed and salad and packing growers, but also starch companies as well. And the aim, that when we set out this project, was to be able to run it worldwide with minimal grower input. We still do need grower input. We need a few targeted digs, but effectively, apart from that, we're getting all the information that we need remotely from satellite and weather models. So the problem, as I mentioned, is that potato crops are unlike normal cereal crops or grass crops, in that every crop is different. We have different yields and different size distributions, both within each field and across multiple fields, even with the same variety. Each size is a different value, and therefore the interaction of crop yield and size distribution times value of the different sizes means that crop value changes spatially across the field, and it's a real problem to know where to take crop digs. So one of the other aims was to try and better target any crop digs that you absolutely that need to be done. So that's one of the tool sets we've developed. And the other thing that's key to recognize is that in a crop that's highly dependent on yield and size distribution, crop value can easily go down as well as up. If you let that crop of salad or seed or packers get too large, then the crop value peaks and then drops like a stone. And that often happens in a normal growing situation. So the benefits of Tuberzone are that we can help you target the in-field digs. So we can reduce the number of digs, but not eliminate them. But we can monitor the different growing crop zones, usually with satellite imagery, and then help target those digs to the places that we know are different within that crop. But also importantly, we can make sure that you don't dig in areas that are not representative. And we've seen a lot of problems with that this year, in that some areas of the crop are absolutely not representative of the crop. And if you take a dig there, it gives you some false information, which then skews either your choice of when to burn down or skews the model. We can reduce the crop digs as well, because we see what the field variability is. And we give the yield and size forecasts. And to give you an idea of the scale of the problem, if you have a normal crop, if there is such a thing, a normal crop grows around about 5 tons per hectare per week during the peak growth phase, which is basically 180 pounds per hectare per day to the bottom line. So every day you can let that grow on, you could potentially add another £100, 180 pounds per hectare. So over a notional 100 hectare potato enterprise, £18,000 a day for every day you can let that crop grow on a little bit more. One of the other problems is that once you start at this time of the year, you've burned down the crops. You've got a lot of crops to harvest. You've got a limited harvesting capacity. So one of the other aims was to try and monitor which crops had most potential to let grow on. So you as a farmer, you need to be able to have enough crops ready to harvest every week. So we keep, once the harvester starts, it keeps on going. So one of the other aims was to try and forecast which crops would be better burned down now and therefore ready for harvest in 3 weeks' time, and which ones we could leave to grow on for in order to capture some of that £180 per hectare per day. So that's the concept, and I wanted to take you through what we're actually doing, where it came from, and how we're actually doing it. So the initial Tuberzone model was there was a lot of work done in what is now the James Hutton Institute in Dundee at Invergowrie there. Back then it was the Scottish Crop Research Institute. It was Donald McCarran and Bruce Marshall who spent a lot of time building the yield and size distribution models. And it was marketed in the early 2000s as MAP, MAPP, Management Advisory Platform Potatoes, as a PC program. And it gained limited success, but really, I think, and most people would agree, it was an idea before its time. The problems MAP had was that the concept was right, but we couldn't easily get access to weather data. You know, in those days, a lot of farms didn't have PCs. They certainly didn't have weather stations, so you had to rely on local averages. You couldn't easily sense canopy size, which is a key input. So all those things made it difficult to reliably get a crop estimation. So in 2015, I formed a consortium and applied for Innovate UK funding for a 3-year project to take the concept of MAP and update it. It was ourselves, we led McCain, Grimmie and Newcastle University, and of course James Hutton Institute. And that went on for 3 years, and we effectively pulled the MAP model to bits and then rebuilt it using more modern, we built it in the clouds where we could use information, satellite imagery, weather models, that sort of thing, to try and better predict the yield and size distribution. And now we've got capacity to run many fields simultaneously. And the aim was always that we should be able to use effectively the same model. So this is very much a mechanistic model, not a stochastic model. So it's a bit easier to parameterize for different varieties and different growing systems. And effectively, it's the same model that is running in many different countries worldwide. So to give you an idea, from last year, we ran, along with SAC Consulting and Grampian Growers, we ran a KTIF, a Knowledge Transfer Innovation Fund, across 76 GMC crops planted in April and May 2019, and those are the red dots on the map of Scotland. So probably 300 kilometres between the dots on that scale. That's one example, one local example of a data set that we did last year. Another one is, and these are all ongoing, another one is some crops in Denmark for starch. You can see the range of distance there. Those were 3 different varieties. So we're on each one of those dots, that's a crop. We're gathering satellite imagery daily to help us validate our predictions of canopy size. So obviously there's many ways of predicting canopy size. Canopy size is a key variable in crop performance, and we need to know how, during the growing season, what percentage ground cover we're capturing, because we need to know the light interception. And it changes spatially across the field and obviously develops over time. And satellite imagery was one of the satellite and UAV imagery were one of the ways that we improved on the actual map model. Now, we still use UAV imagery to some extent, but it's not scalable. We can't easily run UAVs, in different countries in the world. Flying a drone is a relatively time expensive operation. Whereas satellite imagery, we're using 2 constellations at the moment. We're using Sentinel-2, Sentinel-1 to some extent, and Sentinel-2, and PlanetScope. PlanetScope is giving us 3-meter resolution imagery. We can map the actual extent of the crop, which is a surprisingly big problem, actually knowing where the crop is. And it gives us a relatively frequent overpass to give us an idea of canopy size, which we can then use as an input into the model as a surrogate for, or as a estimate of how much light is being intercepted by the crop at any one time. And then obviously split up into the amount of assimilates that are then put into leaf, root, stem, and tubers. The other key part is weather. I mean, one of the big advances over the last few years, I think, has been the improvement of the weather modeling. So we're using commercial global weather models that are roughly field scale, probably 1,000 to 2,000 meter resolution. The resolution changes depending on which particular GFS and model they're using. But part of the Innovate UK project was looking at how accurate these models were compared to a weather station that was not part of their data collection network, if you see what I mean. And actually, we found that the weather models were really pretty good at temperature, pretty good at humidity, pretty good at weather, at wind, speed and direction. So that helps us calculate evapotranspiration. On the rainfall side, they were pretty good at predicting the timing of rainfall. What they weren't brilliant at was predicting the amount of rainfall. So what we tend to do is then average that amount of rainfall over a week, and that gets us fairly close to a total amount of rainfall available to that crop over a week. And of course, these models are getting better all the time. So one of the major limitations in potato and indeed all crops is soil moisture, and we're running an evapotranspiration model using the global weather and precipitation during that week, and any irrigation figures, obviously, between emergence and senescence. We always like to try and validate that model. It's the old story. You make a prediction, you've got to find some other way of validating it. One of the other ways of validation we've been testing is using SAR, synthetic aperture radar imagery, to give us an estimation of soil moisture. Now that soil moisture tends to be only down to 50 to 100 millimeters, so not too deep, but it's a validation of actually seeing the long-term trends in soil moisture and actually checking that we are predicting the same thing. It's not perfect, but it's a step forward. Obviously, we're forecasting the evapotranspiration and the soil moisture deficit. If we see that the crop is under stress, either because of too much water or too little water, we bring in different limitations, different stress factors into the model to try to reduce the yield, to reduce the canopy expansion, and to take account of the yield reductions in both of those cases, and that seems to work quite well. I'm hesitant to say we've been lucky, but in 2018 we've had a very dry growing season. In 2019 it was the complete opposite. It was very wet. So we've had 2 ideal seasons across Northwest Europe to help us parameterize those stress functions. And so far, they seem to be working really pretty well. One of the key parts was that, well, one of the key challenges really is that we find it impossible at the moment. The thing we can't do is to forecast the final established number of tubers per square meter that are produced by the crop. You know, if you know potatoes, you know that when you plant and they emerge, you get a mass of potato production, effectively, little at tuberization. They get lots of little tuberized potatoes. Not all of those go on to become full-size potatoes, which contribute to the crop. It depends a lot on temperature, a lot on humidity, the amount of sugar that is being produced. There's a lot of range of factors. But in all the work that we've done, and all the papers we've read, and all the experience we've had, we've never found a way of actually predicting the final established number of tubers per square meter. Therefore, we have to go and actually get the growers to go and take text digs. Now we have a mobile app where we produce we take a time series of satellite imagery, and using that we produce 2 or 3 zones depending on the field. The red zones that you see there are areas that are out with the normal distribution of the crop, and we should absolutely not take test digs there. If you do, it will be skewed. It'll either be on one side or the other side of the distribution. However, in some fields you get one distribution, and then we choose the area within that one distribution which is most normal, I suppose. And then in some fields you get another area that is needing to be sampled. So we send those points to the grower. They take the samples at those points and feed us back the results. Then that gives us a fairly accurate estimation of the tubers per square meter in those 2 zones, which then feeds the model. So to give you an idea, we produce daily estimates of fresh weight through the growing season, and you can see this is actually a slide I had from 2018, where we're showing canopy progression throughout the year, which is the orange line, and fresh weight progression. As I said, in 2018, what we saw was the rapid fresh weight progression up until about the end of June, beginning of July, when a lot of crops right throughout Europe had a real plateau. This particular one was an irrigated crop, so it did suffer slightly, but it was then irrigated and the fresh weight progression increased. But some crops, particularly in Northwest Germany, almost had a complete plateau all the way until they died. So, as I say, we're predicting fresh weight daily throughout the growing season until the canopy is killed. After the canopy is killed, depending on the method of killing, whether it's flailing or chemical control, we then estimate the amount of reabsorption of starch and sugars from the canopy back into the tubers. So just because the canopy is killed off, it doesn't mean that the potatoes stop growing. They do grow. They do keep on adding weight and yield and growing in size over time. But how much they do that depends on the method of killing. And of course, if you're a potato agronomist, you know that last year we lost a really important chemical called Diquat, which is trade name was Reglone, and a few others. That's been a real tough one to get round. There are other chemicals, but they're not nearly as quick acting as Reglone was. So we're having to reparameterize some of those models to take that into account. As I said, there's actually 2 models running here in parallel. One is the yield model, which takes the daily light intensity from the weather model, takes the canopy size, and then calculates the daily fresh weight gain and adds that up and to give you the canopy and the yield progression figures I'm showing there. The other separate but linked is the size distribution model, which takes the fresh weight and effectively the number of tubers per square meter, and divides one into the other, and comes up with a size distribution. This size distribution is affected obviously by variety and the number of tubers per square meter, but we're really quite pleased with the way the size distribution model is working. In this case in potatoes, but actually in a whole range of crops. So that's how we go from size to size distribution through that relationship with variety and the number of tubers. So effectively, we were calculating the weight and number and weight of in 5mm size bands right across the growing season. So the first question everyone asks is accuracy. Now, each one of these points is one of the crops that I showed right at the start, one of those red dots that were scattered throughout Scotland. One of the big problems we've been having is actually defining accuracy, because everything is different. The model predicts biological weight at in the field. So at that point in time, total biological weight in the field. A dig is great, but there's always errors. There's always potatoes being lost. There's variability within the digs. Then when the harvester comes through, the harvester harvests the crop. It doesn't harvest all the crop. Some of the crop is left behind. And also the harvester slightly changes the size distribution of the crop, because it tends to leave more small tubers and tends to pick up all the large tubers. So the size distribution changes slightly during the harvesting process. Then you put the potatoes at the store, and obviously not only potatoes go into store, but soil. A bit of soil goes into store, a bit of stems, shaws, and of course, if you're in Scotland, a few stones go into store. So that changes the size. Changes the total box count there. In store, you tend to get some, depending on the storage conditions, you tend to get moisture loss, so that changes the weight. And then once they're graded out of store, you get grading losses because of disease and picking losses. You get size distribution inaccuracies and so on. So it's comparing these numbers is we're finding is it hard? It's not hard. You just have to bear in mind that you are not always comparing like with like. In this example, this is us comparing the model yield on the X with the box yield on Y. As I say, each one of those dots is one of the red dots that were scattered throughout Scotland from a crop of Jemson. You can see the one-to-one line in the middle, and the orange line on the outside are 85% accuracy, and you can see that most of those dots are falling within those the 85-90%. Some quite close to 100% accuracy in yield in tons per hectare. Now the ones that outside, I mean, I'm a farmer and I know how difficult it is to deal with farmers, as in I'm the world's worst. But effectively, when you're dealing with a large number of crops, you have a lot of data gathering problems. So sometimes only part of a crop is lifted in case of the one down near the origin. Wrong areas, it's really actually difficult to get an accurate area for every single crop, because a lot of it is an estimate. There's just data recording errors in the wrong number of boxes, wrong areas. If crops are very narrow, small, then we have a particular problem because the satellite image we're using can't pick up, say 10-meter resolution Sentinel-2 imagery can't pick up that. You can't pick up that particular narrow crop. You can't get a spectrally unmixed pixel from that particular crop. So there are errors there, but we're usually able to identify those ones which fall out with the 90-80% accuracy areas, and we know which errors to look out for now. Size distribution, as I said, yield is one model, size distribution is another model. They are linked. once those crops were graded out, actually physically rolled over a grader with all the attendant losses and losses of the small ones, you can see that we're on the important size distribution that growers want to sell, in this case seed, between 35 and 55, we're around about 4% error on the seed. The tops fraction, which is the 55 plus, we're around 4% error, and the 25-35 is about 10% error. But of course, there's only a very, very small amount of those in the whole crop, you know. So that's, you know, probably less than a few tons per hectare. And we think that accuracy is important, but reliability is probably more important. And you can see in this graph, we've got the number of crops that fall within the size, the number of the accuracy of the number of crops within each band in 5%. So we've got the vast majority are within 95% accurate in a between 35 and 55, and we've got a very few who are only one or two crops are only 50% accurate. So that's important to try and get the forecast correct. Reporting is quite it's not a difficult subject, but every grower wants it slightly differently. So we tend to produce a series of customized reports. Some people want them shown in 5mm size bands and then summarized into the key seed sales bands. Some want it in percentages, some want them in Excel sheets, some want them you know, in their own format with their own logos and colors on it. So we try and accommodate that. Effectively, what we see is that it's very clear it's really fascinating to watch the evolution and development of the crop. So you can see in this particular example, we've got almost no 35-55 left, and it's reducing, whereas the 45-55 is actually increasing, because the whole size distribution has moved up the size bands, and the 45-55 is still increasing. Give it another couple of weeks, if this crop isn't burnt down, and the peak of the size distribution will have moved past that, and it will be up into the 55-60, and it'll be too late. This is a seed crop, so he should be burning this down fairly soon. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's already burnt down. Oh, sorry. The next thing we're doing is that we've been producing virtual yield and size distribution maps. So just as we're running the model on a whole field, we can run the model on subfield areas and produce yield and size distribution estimations on smaller areas, on grids. And here's an example of one crop in Poland, I think this was from last year, where we're producing a yield map, and that was validated by DIGS, and also a size distribution. So that, when we started doing this, I had an ambition that we should be able to go and spray each one of those grids is a 24-meter by 12-meter grid aligned with the tram lines in the crop. And one of my ambitions was to be able to go and spray each grid at the peak value, not the peak yield, but the peak value. Unfortunately, with the loss of all the chemical controls we have nowadays, that's getting really difficult, as I alluded to earlier. Most people are now moving to flailing, which makes it impossible to do this. But we're continuing with this part of the project, continuing to produce virtual yield maps as we go through the season, size maps, and gross margin maps. Oh, I keep going to. So, as a summary, hopefully I've conveyed that Tuberzone's a spatial crop model that I think accurately forecasts potato yield and size distribution, which is important because we've got to maximize financial output from a potato crop. It costs a heap of money to grow potatoes, indeed all root crops, and there's nothing worse than letting them go out with the size distribution that the customer wants, and therefore the value drops. One of the other things that was really important to me was that we could run this virtually worldwide with minimal grower input. Now we've effectively got it down to gathering information from the grower. We need to know variety. We need to know the crop boundary, and we need them at the moment. We need to get them to go and do crop digs at specific places, and that's hopefully about it. Accuracy is around 90% for both yield and size distribution, but I think that we're really trying hard to improve reliability rather than accuracy, if that makes sense. 90% is fine, but I want it to be 90% all the time, not just occasionally. So I think we're getting there and there, and we're working quite hard now to move this from not just potatoes to other root crops, so carrots, onions, sugar beet, all that. I think that's where the next stage is taking us. So I think that's me now. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll be happy to take questions either now or later on.
Thank you very much for that, Jim. We have one question already, which is coming through the chat from Tim actually. Could Jim comment on what he considers are the main causes of different crop zones within fields?
Yeah, okay. So I'll go backwards. How we detect them tends to be satellite. So satellite tends to see the different canopy cover in the different zones. What causes a different canopy cover is stress of various types. Soil moisture is obviously one of the main ones, which restricts canopy growth. Quite often you can have adequate soil moisture, but you tend to get different compaction. You know, potato equipment's very heavy. We tend to work it when it's too wet. You tend to put in layers of compaction underneath the bed, and that can artificially restrict root growth as well. So that's another major cause that we see. And soil type, of course. Heavy soils tend to be more restrictive to root growth, and that also shows up in restricted canopies as well. So heavy soils tend to be smaller canopy sizes, but of course they have more, ultimately they have more nutrients and water in them, so they tend to catch up later in the season. So yeah, water is probably the main one. Different soil types and man-made compaction or fertilizer mistakes would be the main things I would see in those canopies.
I think you've still got your screen sharing on, Jim.
Okay.
It's a lovely shot of you skiing. Thank you very much.
That's all right.
We're all enjoying. Paul's asked a question actually. Is there scope to use the model to predict the yield/size relationships at the time of planting and adjust spacings to maximize return? There's yes. A man with an allotment.
Yes. Okay. So this was one of the main, one of the ideas we had right at the start, in that we would virtually, and still do virtually, grow a crop during the season. So you know the variety, you know the field, you know your target market. You can virtually grow that crop all the way through. The problem is that what you don't know is what the weather's going to do. So you can certainly use an average weather, the average climate model or whatever for the last 20 years. Unfortunately, if you use average weather, it tends to be sunny every day and it rains every day. So you have an issue there. If you use a specific weather, you know, say a very dry year, 2018 recently, a very wet year, 2012, for example, you can produce predictions for crops using those two different weather patterns, and you can choose the best seed rate to take out as much variability as possible based on those weather patterns. So that's been done, and we've planted a crop based on that with variable rate planting. The trouble is that on the day you plant, the planned weather immediately diverges from the actual weather, and the crop diverges from its planned route. How much it diverges depends on, obviously, on how differently the actual weather is from your planned weather. Effectively, we found that in some situations there were some areas of the field that are always high yielding. So you had a pretty good idea that you had to increase seed rate there. In some areas the field are always low yielding, so you had a fair idea that normally you could pull the seed spacing apart. And there's some areas that do flick back and forward. So we've got lots of customers now who do variable rate planting. It's a mixture of an idea from the model and and their own experience. And that's really where we've got to. It seems to be working reasonably well, but it's not as easy as I had hoped it would be right at the start of this project back in the early 2010s. One thing I would say is that it's been fascinating to be able to go back and take crops, historic crops, so a crop from 2016 or 2017, and run the model against them to help us calibrate that specific variety. So if we're starting up with a new variety, I think we've got about 60 odd varieties calibrated now. If you have a new variety and we can go and get crop histories from previous growing seasons, we can go back and get the satellite imagery from that crop. We can get the weather information of that crop, and we can get crop digs from that crop, and then run the model historically to help us calibrate the yield and size distributions virtually, if you like, and that's been working quite successfully. So sorry, Paul, I don't know if that quite answered your question, but it's something that I would love to be able to do, but until we can get a better weather prediction, I find I'm struggling to do it.
You've got the thumbs up from Paul there, Jim.
Good.
Declan's asked a question. Tell us about cloud cover issues.
Yes. Do I have to? Yeah, there are big issues. At the moment, we're running. So we've got two satellite systems. Well, we've tried many. We've settled on two satellite constellations, as I said earlier. Sentinel-2 and Sentinel-2, which comes across every 5 days or so, gives us roughly 10 meter pixel resolution, multispectral, good quality imagery, and PlanetScope, which comes across daily, gives us 3.5 meter resolution-ish, RGB and near infrared. Not quite as good quality, I would have to say, based on the size of the sensor. At the moment, we're running about 82% cloud cover issues. So we're only getting an image, 1 in 4 or so. That's a problem. There's no doubt, because we're getting daily imagery from Planet. That does compensate to some extent. So far, we haven't managed. We haven't had a. There's always problems, but we haven't actually failed to produce a model, produce an estimation because of lack of satellite imagery. But it's been a close run thing, especially in maybe some of the cloudier areas of Scotland. Where are we going? I mentioned Sentinel-1 earlier and SAR imagery. That's absolutely where we need to go. We need to start using a combination of Sentinel-1, Sentinel-2, or SAR invisible to try and get some estimation, some idea of canopy growth every single day through the growing season. And that'll be a test. We're into testing phase for that for next year. So yeah, satellite imagery is an issue, but it's much better than it used to be.
Just sort of moving on from that, David's asked a question. Is it possible to use ground penetrating radar or ultrasonic techniques to get a view of the crop size and density?
You probably know there's two or three projects, current Innovate UK projects on the go trying to do this very thing. I'm sure it's possible. Well, is it possible? I don't know. I did try many years ago with a GPR unit, ultrasonic as well. I haven't tried ultrasonic, but it should be possible. There is a current Innovate UK project, as I say, on trying to do this very thing from Beehive. I think there'll be challenges. I do. I think from memory, obviously a potato is a bag of water. Probably 20% dry matter, 80% moisture, and the dielectric constant of a potato is around, from memory, 80. From memory, 80. From memory, the dielectric constant of most soils that are grown in potatoes, the potatoes grow in, is around about 80 to 100. The dielectric constant, so you're going to have a differentiation problem there. The dielectric constant of dry soil is 5 to 10, again from memory. Excuse me if I'm wrong. So I can quite believe that you get a very good differentiation using GPR between dry soil and potatoes. Wet potatoes and wet soil, I think you'll struggle. But I await the outcome of that project with interest, shall we say.
I've got a couple of questions here, Jim, from Ranjan. Have you done any work in Canada?
The answer is we've been speaking to people in Canada, but we haven't run the model in Canada, no.
And there was a supplementary question here as well, which is with RGB imaging of Canopy, you could predict water stress. Have you looked at that in your model?
Yes. I'm not. I'm not so convinced. The RGB, the RGB we're getting from Sentinel-2 and Planet is, average. We tend to want to look at tend to use the infrared part of the spectrum, and we prefer to. I've obviously played with all the sorts of water stress indexes, the WD, VI, and things like this. I've never had a great deal of success looking at water stress in Canopy. It's too transitory and it's difficult to separate from other things. But if someone's got a new tool or technique I can use, I would love to know about it.
Well, it looks like you've got a job offer here from Ranjan, and he said he'd love to work with you, and he's in Manitoba in Canada. So
okay, right.
They can pass each other's phone numbers later or something. I'm not quite sure what the professional methodology is through a format like this, but I'm sure Sarah can sort that out. Have we got any other questions, folks? Shakes of heads, silence. Any other comments? Speak now or forever hold your peace. I have, Jim, thoroughly enjoyed today's session. Thank you very much. And I often say this, but I find the Q&A equally important because you can go off into tangents about things. Often you've given us quite a lot of what didn't work, which often the what didn't work leads you a lot better towards what did work than sort of going off in that direction. And I think that's been fascinating. Thank you.
No. Well, thank you very much. And thanks for all the questions. And it's, I think it is important to know what doesn't work, because there's an awful lot that doesn't work. And there's no point in pretending that everything works all the time, because in agriculture, it surely doesn't.